Welcome to Copilot Podcasts. Picture this. A father climbs out his bedroom window, waits on the roof, then jumps down to beat his wife's lover with a baseball bat while his 13-year-old son watches from inside, crying. Today, we're diving into Brad's Fort Benning years, a decade of military-based life that shaped one kid's chaotic coming of age from ages 5 to 16. You'll understand how constant deployments and base housing create a unique childhood, and why military kids develop such intense attachment patterns. Let me bring in someone who's been analyzing these stories.
That rooftop fight is the climax of everything, but it starts so much earlier. Brad's family arrives at Fort Benning in 2001 when he's just 5 years old. His dad, Andre, had just entered active duty, and they're moving into this whole military ecosystem.
And immediately, you see how military life shapes everything. They get a golden retriever named Lucky when they first move to the base. But then they go on a trip, leave Lucky with Dad's friend Barry from his unit, and Barry loses the dog. Lucky's just gone when they get back.
Right away, you're seeing this pattern. The military creates these intense bonds between families, but also this constant instability. People you trust let you down, things you love disappear. And Brad's experiencing this at 5 years old.
Their first address is 856 Arrowhead Road in McGraw Manor, and the document describes these cicada shells covering all the trees throughout the neighborhood. That's such a specific detail.
It's brilliant because it immediately puts you in that Georgia military housing environment. But what's fascinating is how Brad maps out the geography. There are 3 routes up from the lower part of the neighborhood. Hospital Hill, which was so steep you'd probably fall and end up at the hospital. The footpath with 100 cement steps. And Moon Street.
He's creating this mental map of his world, which makes sense when your dad is deployed 4 out of 8 years during your childhood. From age 6 through his early teens, Andre was constantly leaving for Iraq.
The deployments create this rhythm. When Dad's gone, it's just Mom managing the household. When Dad's home, there's structure and discipline, but also what Brad calls daddy torture. This relentless pecking of his forehead with a pointer finger.
Wait, that's actually kind of sweet in a weird military dad way. But then you have incidents like the BB gun thing. Dad tells Brad and his brother Steven that if you put the BB gun right on your tongue when you pull the trigger, it doesn't hurt.
Brad trusts him completely. Dad puts the gun in Brad's mouth, on his tongue. Brad jumps at the last moment, the gun fires and shoots him in his front right tooth, chipping it. The dentist has to reattach the tooth.
That's such a perfect example of military family dynamics, this mix of playfulness and genuine danger, trust and betrayal. And Brad's processing all this as a little kid.
Exactly. And you see it in smaller moments too. Dad grows tomatoes, makes his own salsa, offers Brad a spoonful to taste. At the last second, he slips some habanero onto the spoon and burns little Brad's tongue.
There's this constant testing, this edge to everything. Even grocery shopping becomes memorable because Steven would just sit down on the floor in the commissary aisle whenever Mom stopped to look at something.
But what really shapes Brad is the constant loss. The pets keep dying, mice killed by fleas from the cat, the dog that got lost, Ms. Kitty, Balto the husky, Duchess the bulldog, all dead before they move from Lavoie Avenue.
And then in 2004, when Brad's 8, his grandparents Woody and Marilyn move in. Woody's mostly bedridden, and Brad watches him deteriorate through his childhood. So there's this constant presence of decline and death in the household.
Which explains so much about Brad's later attachment patterns. When you're constantly losing things you love, you develop this desperate intensity about holding on to what you have. Look at how he describes his relationship with Katie, getting up way before necessary just to see her before she caught the bus.
Right, and he admits he was extremely devoted to a degree that probably put some girls off. But here's what's interesting. His music taste evolution mirrors his emotional development.
Tell me about that.
Up until age 14, Brad's music taste was basically whatever his dad showed him. Dad was into Bone Thugs and Lil Wayne, so Brad listened to similar artists. But then his girlfriend Sabrina brings over 2 CDs, My Chemical Romance's Black Parade and All American Rejects' Move Along.
And that changes everything. He opens Pandora, types in MCR, gets Noise and Kisses by The Used. Quote, "That's when it all changed. He starts actively exploring music instead of passively accepting Dad's choices."
It's this moment of independence, of finding his own identity. But it's also happening while his behavior is escalating. He's smoking cigarettes in 8th grade, stealing condoms and Playboy magazines to sell to teenagers.
The document says this was before everything fell apart, meaning before the affair. So even before the family explodes, Brad's already acting out, already pushing boundaries.
And then we get to the discovery. Dad's deployed in Iraq. Brad tells him about Carl, Aunt Angie's ex-husband, during a video call. Dad has Brad put tape over the webcam light and leave the computer running while he goes to bed.
Dad's in his tent in Iraq when he hears the phone ring through the open mic. He hears Mum pick up and say, "I love you too" to someone. He unmutes his side, confronts her, and her reaction confirms everything.
Within 48 hours, Dad goes up the chain of command, gets emergency leave, and he's home. But here's the thing. He warns Mom not to show up at the house with Carl. They show up anyway.
That's when we get the rooftop fight. Dad's upstairs, climbs out the bedroom window onto the front porch overhang and waits. When Carl gets out of the car, Dad jumps off the roof and starts swinging.
The whole time, Mom is hitting Dad in the head with a 4D cell mag light. Dad doesn't even realize it's happening until it's over. His head is lumpy with knots afterward.
And Brad and Stephen are watching from the window with Uncle Ryan. Brad is crying. This 13-year-old kid is watching his entire world explode in real time.
The aftermath is brutal. Dad has to report to base. Military protocol removes the soldier from the household during any domestic dispute. He's put in barracks for 3 weeks while Mom, Carl, and the kids stay in the house.
Eventually, Dad gets the house back. Mom and Carl move to Columbus together. But Dad starts dating Mom's cousin Susie, and Brad says everything changed. Quote, Brad had always looked up to his dad until Susie appeared.
Susie is described as homophobic, lazy, dumb, and Brad watches his dad become what he calls pussy-whipped, making terrible decisions for women. But here's the self-awareness. Brad recognizes he does the same thing.
Right, he admits to being extremely devoted, losing it when relationships ended, screaming in the streets after the Katie breakup. The difference is, Brad's 15, dealing with teenage intensity. Dad's throwing away his military career.
And that's what makes this so tragic. Brad can see the pattern, but he's trapped in it. Military kids develop this intense loyalty because they're constantly losing people. Every friend is temporary, so when you find someone you connect with, you hold on desperately.
Which explains the escalating behavior. By 9th grade, Brad's smoking weed, getting tattoos from some guy named John in Cossetta, having bad trips on K2 Spice. He's curled up under an ASC unit, seeing kaleidoscopes.
There's this incident where he tries to hide a dip can between his ass cheeks to avoid getting searched at school. He has to walk around with his cheeks clenched, trying not to let it fall out.
It's almost comedic, but it's also this kid desperately trying to maintain some control over his life. Everything else is chaos, family falling apart, constant moves, friends disappearing, but he can control whether he gets caught with tobacco.
And then there's the Wesley incident with the whippets. Brad passes out from nitrous oxide. Wesley turns the can upside down and sprays icy cold gas down the front of Brad's pants, giving him frostbite near his crotch.
Wesley tells Brad he did it to himself. Months later, Wesley admits he did it on purpose. This is assault, not an accident. But Brad's so used to being betrayed by people he trusts that he just accepts it.
It's this pattern of trust and betrayal that started with Dad and the BB gun, continued with friends like Wesley, and culminated with watching his parents destroy each other.
Eventually, Brad runs away from Dad's place during 9th grade. The trigger was probably petty, getting caught smoking again. But he bolts out the front door, runs to the Starbucks on Fort Benning, hides under the benches, and calls Mum to pick him up.
And that's the end of the Fort Benning era. This decade that began when he was 5 with a golden retriever named Lucky that included 3 different addresses, multiple schools, friends who came and went with military rotations.
7 deployments by his dad, the affair, the family split, his own chaotic teenage years, all of it happening in this military housing environment with its own rules and culture.
What strikes me is how the military structure both protected and damaged him. The base provided stability, same schools, same neighborhoods, same commissary. But the constant deployments and military culture created this emotional instability.
And you see it in the details. Dad installing a keylogger and catching Brad searching for black woman oral. The wrestling program where Mum gives both kids Stephen's Adderall before tournaments. These moments of surveillance and medication that feel very military.
Or the field trip to Red Cloud Range where 4th graders get to shoot mounted rifles and climb into tanks. This normalization of violence alongside family chaos.
But there's also this incredible resilience. Brad maps out his neighborhood, finds subwoofers on Moon Street, sets up a garage hangout with speakers and GameCube. He's constantly adapting, constantly finding ways to create his own space.
Even the relationship with his friend Zane shows this. Zane introduces him to parkour, Old Crow medicine show, making hooch in juice containers. They're stealing bits of alcohol, night fishing on the Chattahoochee River, eating beans and shrimp with their hands.
It's this beautiful teenage friendship happening against the backdrop of family destruction. And when Brad reconnects with Zane years later, Zane describes himself as a feral child during that time, but Brad never saw him as weird or an asshole.
Which says something about Brad's capacity for loyalty and acceptance, even when his own family is falling apart around him.
So when you step back from all this, what you're seeing is how military life creates these intense, complicated childhoods. The constant moves, the deployments, the base housing. It's this unique environment that shapes everything.
And Brad's story shows both the resilience and the damage. He develops this incredible ability to adapt and find connection, but also these desperate attachment patterns that follow him into adulthood.
The Fort Benning years end with him running away, but they've already shaped who he is. That 5-year-old who lost Lucky the golden retriever becomes the 16-year-old hiding under Starbucks benches, calling mum for rescue.
It's a decade of constant motion, between houses, between parents, between friends who deploy and disappear. But through it all, Brad's mapping his world, finding his music, learning to survive in a system that's both protective and destructive.
And that rooftop fight becomes this perfect metaphor, Dad literally jumping off the roof to fight for his family, while his kids watch from inside, powerless to stop the destruction.
Next time you see a military family, remember Brad's story. Behind the structure and discipline, there are kids navigating constant loss, learning to attach and detach, finding their own way through chaos. Thanks for joining us on Copilot Podcasts.